Love turned fatal, and guilt traveled decades before giving way to confession when the perpetrator turned himself in. 41-year-old mother of 3, Janet Jones Luxford left her home in Florida in February 2001 to meet up with Brian Jones, a truck driver, at a Jacksonville hotel where she worked. They traveled to Bessemer, Alabama together. Janet never returned home, and in 2002, one of her daughters reported her missing. Despite all efforts, no trace of Janet is found, and the case grew cold. 21 years after she disappeared, on March 27, 2022, the man responsible for her end took a bus from South Carolina to Alabama, where he sat outside of the police station in Bessemer until he finally got the nerve to walk into the station and turn himself in. Brian Jones told them that he was working as a day laborer and that he and Janet were in a relationship. She wanted to get money to go back to her hometown, which is California, to see her parents, and from that, an argument started. He described that it got out of hand, and he ended up hitting her with a club in the throat. He said that her demise was accidental, and that it happened at a motel in the 1100 block of 9th Avenue Southwest in Bessemer. The next day, on March 28th, Jones led the police to the place where he dumped Janet's body back in 2001. There, they found a green suitcase filled with skeletal remains. The Jefferson County Coroner's Office used medical records and DNA to help identify the remains. Janet's disappearance is not a case that was on the investigators' radar. It is something that he committed 21 years ago, and nobody knew that it happened besides him. In May 2022, Jones has been charged with slaying and abuse of a corpse. He was taken to the Jefferson County Jail and was being held on a $765,000 bond. On October 7, 2024, he pleaded guilty to ending the life of Janet. As part of the plea deal, the abuse of a corpse charge has been dropped. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison, 1 year for each year Janet was missing. As for why Jones waited so long to confess to the crime, he explained to the Bessemer police that he did not want to disappoint his parents. His parents passed away in 2021. Bessemer Police Lieutenant Christian Clemens said, "He seemed enormously remorseful and appeared to be someone who had been carrying the weight of this around for a long time and was relieved to have it over." Lieutenant Clemens described this case as a once-in-a-career type of situation. Janet's daughter, Amanda Luxford Fernandez, said, "She just disappeared off the face of the earth and there were no answers." She said that her mother's disappearance haunted her and her 2 siblings. "The only silver lining," she said, "is knowing her mother did not purposely stay away for 21 years. She added, "We are happy we are getting answers, but we are also going to get some justice." Two girls that went missing in 2002 while on their way to the school bus stop were found right under the noses of the detectives working their cases. On January 9, 2002, just after 8 a.m., 12-year-old Ashley Pond was running late for school. Ashley lived with her mother, Lori Pond, at the Newell Creek Village Apartments in Oregon City, Oregon. The apartment was just 10 minutes away from the bus stop, and while walking to the bus stop, she disappeared. She never got on the bus and never made it to Gardner Middle School. Despite the efforts of the local authorities and the FBI, no clues surfaced as to the whereabouts of the missing girl. Ashley was popular at school and enjoyed being on the swim and dance teams. Neither her mother, friends, nor the investigators believed that she had run away. 2 months later, on March 8th, 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis, Ashley's friend and neighbor, vanished in the same manner on her way to that very same bus stop. Miranda's mother, Michelle Duffy, had left for work about 30 minutes before Miranda was to catch the bus. When Michelle discovered that Miranda had not been at school, she immediately contacted the police, but once again, the investigators came up empty. The authorities conclude that the cases are likely connected, suspecting they were abducted by someone known in the community due to the lack of physical evidence or struggle. It seemed that whoever the perpetrator was, he or she seemed to be targeting the same type of girl. Ashley and Miranda were close in age, involved in similar activities, looked remarkably similar to each other, and, most importantly, both girls disappeared on their way to the bus stop. Shortly after Ashley and Miranda disappeared, Ward Weaver III became a prime suspect in the investigation, but it took the FBI 8 months to get a search warrant to search his property. On August 13th, Weaver's son, Francis, contacted 911 to report that his father had attempted to indecently assault his 19-year-old girlfriend. The girlfriend, who ran naked from the Weaver house, told the police that Weaver indecently assaulted her and then tried to smother her. Francis also told the dispatcher that his father confessed to ending the lives of Ashley and Miranda. Both of the girls were friends with Weaver's 12-year-old daughter and had visited her at Weaver's home. Weaver's daughter was in the same dance class as the two girls. Ashley was often at the Weaver house as a house guest. She also went along with the family the previous year on a vacation to California. The trip included a visit to Weaver's dad, a Capitol Row inmate who once buried a perpetrator victim in his own yard. Weaver was arrested on unrelated charges, prompting law enforcement to seek a warrant to search his property. On August 24th, FBI agents searched Weaver's home and found the remains of Miranda inside a box in the storage shed. The following day, they found the remains of Ashley buried under a slab of concrete that Weaver had recently put down for a hot tub. The 39-year-old toolmaker had a history of violence against women. An autopsy was conducted to confirm the identification of both girls' remains. Late summer 2002, a public memorial was held for the two girls. On October 2nd, Weaver was indicted and charged with 16 counts, consisting of aggravated slaying, abuse of a corpse, and indecent assault. In September 2004, Weaver pled guilty to all charges, entering a plea deal to avoid the end-of-life penalty. He received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Relatives of the two girls said that they were frustrated and devastated to learn that the bodies were right there in the neighborhood all along. These crimes are not the first pain and suffering to have come into the lives of the two families. Both girls were indecently abused, Ashley by her father, who got probation after pleading guilty to the crime, and Miranda by a former boyfriend of her mother's who was sentenced to 75 months in jail. This is also not Weaver's first brush with the law. Besides the case of his son's girlfriend, he served 3 years in prison for striking his son's babysitter with a chunk of cement. Both of his ex-wives have accused him of violence, and in 2001, Ashley accused him of molesting her, an allegation Weaver denied and did not result in any formal charges being filed. Some people have wondered why it took so long for the police to search the Weaver property, especially since he knew both girls well, had previously been accused of indecently abusing Ashley, and was questioned by the police early in the investigation. Christy Sloan, an ex-wife of Weaver, said that she told the police back then everything they need to know. She told them about the cement that was poured in his backyard 3 days after Miranda went missing. At least both girls and their family could see justice being served. The body of a girl was found in a wooded area in Manhattan, New York, in 1991. She was finally identified after 22 years, and the person responsible for the horrific crime has been identified. On July 23, 1991, the decomposing body of a little girl was found inside a navy blue cooler along the Henry Hudson Parkway in Manhattan, New York. Her little body was naked, and she had been bound with rope and Venetian blind cord. She was placed in the fetal position with her hands pressed together. She was then wrapped in a garbage bag before she was placed in the cooler that was filled with soda cans. Due to the decomposed state of the body, identifying the little girl was impossible at first, so she became known as Baby Hope. The medical examiners concluded that Baby Hope was possibly Hispanic and had dark wavy hair that was in a ponytail. Her body was also extremely malnourished, and she weighed only 28 pounds, 13 kilograms. They believed that she was between the ages of 3 and 5. Baby Hope was also a victim of indecent abuse. The medical examiners believe that she lost her life around July 18th. According to an eyewitness, a Hispanic man and woman was seen carrying a cooler in the location where Baby Hope's body was found. A few months later, in the autumn of 1991, some suggestive images of a nude child were located in New Jersey, which some believed might have been Baby Hope. as the girl in the photographs matched the victim's description. She was buried in 1993 with funds provided by the police. 200 people attended her funeral. In 2006 and 2011, Baby Hope's body was exhumed to obtain DNA samples. The case was reopened in 2013. The tip that broke the case came from an anonymous woman who told the authorities that she had overheard a conversation 2 years prior between a mother and another person regarding the disappearance of her daughter. On the 22nd anniversary of the girl's demise, the detectives canvassed the area near where she was found in the Bronx, asking for information about her identity and the circumstances leading to her end. The police passed out flyers and announced a $12,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. This information led the investigators to Anjelica Castillo. DNA was collected and tested and came back a match. She was the mother of Baby Hope, who could finally be identified as Anjelica Castillo. Anjelica was one of 3 children. Her father, Genaro Ramirez, was an abusive man. Genaro had taken 2 of his 3 children and disappeared. Anjelica's mother believed that he took Anjelica and her sister and returned to Mexico, but instead, he left Anjelica in New York with her adult female cousin, Balvina Juarez Ramirez, who lived in Queens. Balvina's brother Conrado Juarez, who was 30 at the time of the alleged crime, said that he went to the apartment in Queens shared by 7 of his relatives, and he saw Anjelica in the hallway. After a long interrogation, Juarez eventually confessed on videotape that he indecently assaulted and smothered Anjelica, then disposed of her body in the cooler. When the girl went motionless, he summoned his sister from another room. It was she who told him to get rid of the body and who provided the cooler. Juarez then folded the girl in half, tied her, and placed her in a garbage bag inside the cooler. Juarez and his sister hailed a cab to Manhattan, dropped the cooler off in a wooded area near the Parkway, then went their separate ways. The confession was the main evidence against him, and his lawyer, Mr. Croce, argued that it was coerced. By the time of 52-year-old Juarez's arrest in October 2013, his sister had passed away. As Anjelica's mother believed that she was in Mexico with her father, she never reported her missing. Juarez had waited for his trial for 5 years. In 2015, he was transferred from Rikers Island to Rockland County Correctional Facility for his own safety. He passed away in 2018 at Montefiore Nyack Hospital following complications related to pancreatic cancer. A mother of 5 was brutally slain in 1985. 2 decades later, justice came knocking for the trio who is responsible. In June 1985, 40-year-old mother of 5, Ada Frances Senenfelder, was found deceased in her Winona, Minnesota apartment. She was spotted through the window by a curious neighbor who told another neighbor, who called the authorities. The first neighbor said that he and his wife noted that Ada's TV had been on all night, which they thought was strange, so he peered through the front room window. The room was reportedly full of beds, and he could see the body wedged in between one of them and a wall. Word of the crime spread as the police officers and the investigators swarmed the neighborhood on the 500 block of East 4th Street. Yellow ribbon was hastily strung across the yard around the house, and a Bureau of Criminal Apprehension team was on its way. According to news accounts from the time, more than 100 people gathered along the sidewalks to gawk as the investigation stretched late into the night. All the police said at the time was that Ada's cause of demise was not from natural causes. This shocked the Winona community. The next morning, an autopsy revealed that she had sustained over 30 stab wounds, including a fatal wound to the heart, with injuries on her face, neck, arms, and torso. A kitchen knife was found in the home that they suspect was the weapon used in the crime. They also found blood smears on a door inside the house. There were no signs of forced entry, and the investigators turned their attention to virtually everyone who knew the victim, who family members said had no known enemies. Ada's second husband, John Senenfelder, was serving a 54-month sentence in prison for first-degree criminal conduct at the time of the crime. Her first husband, Casimir Flack, was deceased. Her 5 children, 3 with her first husband and 2 with her second, were said to be from 6 to 16 years old, and all were living in foster homes. Although Ada still owned the home on East 4th Street where she was found, she was reportedly living on and off with a man named Clyde Dwayne Bobby Fort on Wilson Street several months before the crime. Fort had been arrested and incarcerated for unrelated crimes at the time. The police followed numerous leads and sifted through mountains of evidence, even garbage from the neighborhood, looking for clues to the perpetrator's identity. But after developing strong suspects and questioning more than 100 people about the crime, the case soon grew cold as concrete evidence eluded investigators. Evidence found at the scene suggested that multiple attackers were involved, but unfortunately, the case went cold. In 2006, the cold case was reopened by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's Cold Case Unit. A $50,000 reward was offered, and DNA evidence from the crime scene was reanalyzed. DNA extracted from cigarette butts found in Ada's home led the investigators to Nisalki. In the summer of 1985, prior to her end, Ada had reported to the authorities that James Raymond Bolstad had indecently assaulted her daughter. Bolstad was arrested for violating his probation. He was angry. He told his girlfriend Linda Mae Parrish that she must take care of things and get Ada to recant her statement. Parrish had a friend, John Willis Nisalki, that moved in the same party circles as her. She asked him to help her take care of Ada. The two began harassing Ada. They broke into her apartment multiple times. They stole her personal belongings. They did what they could to intimidate her into recanting her statement to police. Eventually, it worked. Ada told Bolstad's probation officer that she had lied about the indecent assault allegations, while Nisalki taped the so-called confession from the next room. On June 5, 1985, Bolstad, while still in jail, calls his girlfriend. He angrily informs her that Ada's recantation was not sufficient and he would remain jailed. Parrish, present at a party that evening, relays a message urging Bolstad's friends to go further with Ada. She was overheard telling partygoers that she would pay someone to end Ada's life. Following that call, Nisalki, and possibly others, left the party and ended the life of Ada in her bedroom. On July 3, 2008, a grand jury indicted the three individuals: John Willis Nisalki for slaying, Linda Mae Parrish for first-degree slaying that was later reduced to manslaughter, and James Raymond Bolstad. One witness testified at trial that they had seen Nisalki the night of the incident with a bloodied hand, wrapped in a white towel. That same witness testified that they lived in the same apartment as Ada at the time. That night, Nisalki knocked on her door and asked for a flashlight because he had lost a knife. Another witness testified that Nisalki and Parrish paid them to help clean Parrish's apartment with ammonia and bleach the day Ada's body was found. Others who testified claimed that Parrish told everyone who attended the party to deny that anyone left the party early. A number of other witnesses testified that, over the years, Nisalki had confessed to ending the life of Ada because she was a snitch. Parrish pled guilty to conspiracy to commit first-degree manslaughter and agreed to testify against the others. She was released after serving approximately 21 months, credited for time already served. In July 2009, Nisalki pleaded not guilty and was convicted on 4 charges related to the case: first-degree premeditated slaying, slaying in the first degree while witness tampering, and 2 counts of aiding and abetting first-degree slaying. He received a life sentence with a minimum of 14 years before parole eligibility. In December 2009, Bolstad pleaded guilty to obstructing an investigation. He was sentenced to about 58 months, but was released immediately, having already served sufficient time in custody for unrelated charges. On March 21, 2024, the Minnesota Supreme Court denied Nisalki's appeal, upholding the verdict against him. A family of 5 was taken away from this world in a crime that shocked Australia in 2009. The perpetrator has been identified and convicted, but he still, to this day, says he is innocent. In the early hours of July 18, 2009, in North Epping, Sydney, 5 family members, 45-year-old Min Lin, his wife, 43-year-old Yun Lily Lin, their sons 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, and Lily's sister, 39-year-old Irene Lin were found bludgeoned till their end in their home. The only immediate family survivor is 15-year-old Brenda Lin, who was on a school trip at the time of the attack. Min was a newsagent proprietor. When the news agency that was run by the Lin family was not open, Min's sister, Kathy, and her husband, Leon bin Robert Z, went to check on them at around 9 a.m. After entering the house via the unlocked front door, they discovered the horrifying scene. The bodies have been bashed so badly that they were almost beyond recognition. Kathy immediately called for an ambulance, but she struggled to explain the situation. Robert left Kathy at the house, waiting for the police to pick up Min and Kathy's parents, who lived in Maryland. The police and the paramedics quickly arrived at the scene, but the victims were pronounced deceased. At the crime scene, the investigators noted heavy blood spatter from floor to ceiling. Because the victims' faces were so disfigured, forensic analysis had to be used to identify them. There was no evidence of a break-in, suggesting the perpetrator used a key. Nothing had been ransacked or stolen. It was clear that the perpetrator had known the layout of the house, the location of the circuit breaker, and the fact that Brenda Lin was not home, as it appeared that the attacker did not enter her room. Forensic analysts also determined that the attacks had been started with a hammer-like object. 4 of the 5 victims had additional signs of asphyxia. There were 24 bloody shoe prints that were also evident, determined to be around US size 8.5 to 10.5, indicating a lone attacker. On July 29th, Kathy and Robert made a public appeal for information about the crimes. A large public family funeral was held for the Lin family on August 8th. Brenda was on a Year 10 French school trip in New Caledonia with Cheltenham Girls High School at the time and learnt of her family's case via Facebook. After the crimes, Robert and Kathy became her legal guardians, and they resumed operation of the newsagent business. Brenda later alleged that she was abused by Robert during this period. In May 2010, Kathy was interviewed by the New South Wales Crime Commission, where she was told that the police found shoe prints from an Asics sneaker at the Lin family home. On police surveillance footage, Robert was captured cutting up and disposing of shoe boxes. The police forensic officers found a bloodstain in his garage. The blood sample was tested, and it contained DNA of 4 of the 5 victims. He was arrested on May 5, 2011, and he was charged with 5 counts of slaying. The police told the media that he emerged as their prime suspect about 6 months after the incident. On December 22nd, Robert's bail application was unsuccessful, and he remained behind bars. He applied for bail again in the New South Wales Supreme Court on March 29, 2012. 4 trials took place between the years 2011 and 2016. The first 2 end in hung juries before Robert was finally found guilty by a majority verdict in January 2017. In 2021, he appealed his conviction in the New South Wales Court of Appeal. His convictions and life sentences were upheld. During the trial, the court heard that he resented Min because he was perceived as the better businessman within the extended family. Robert remains incarcerated, serving 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. It was reported in May 2024 that Brenda Lin is an advocate for survivors of indecent abuse. Since 2021, she had helped to establish a network of 12 meetup hubs, the Survivor Network, in Australia to assist other victims in their recovery process. 2 Oregon cases decades apart has been linked to the same perpetrator. July 1, 1999, was the last day that 42-year-old Mark Jeffrey Dribin, who worked as a cargo worker for United Airlines in Portland, Oregon, was seen alive. On July 6th, he was officially reported missing. Mark was the kind of man who lived a quiet life. His friends knew him as reliable and steady, a man who showed up for his shifts and never missed a beat. That is why it was so unlike him that he never clocked in for work on the 1st of July and he never came home. Days later, on July 18th, his car was found abandoned in southeast Portland. Inside his home, the investigators found no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints, nothing, except an unknown DNA profile. They knew something terrible had happened, but with no suspect and no body, the case was reaching a standstill. By August 2000, the following year, the state declared Mark deceased and the case went cold. His family had no answers, no justice, just a lingering fear that the person who ended his life was still out there. In March 2019, almost 2 decades later, the Portland's Cold Case Unit revisited Mark's case. They sent the old DNA sample that was collected in 1999 to be analyzed using forensic genealogy. In September 2019, the investigation identified Christopher Charles Loverin as a potential suspect through genealogy. They interviewed him in November, asking him about Mark's disappearance. Loverin denied everything, but the investigators were patient. They just needed his DNA. Loverin, a then serially unemployed Portland man, had a minor criminal history. As the detectives were busy investigating, another man, 56-year-old Kenneth Griffin from Portland, also disappeared without a trace in February 2020. Like Mark, Kenneth was well-liked, dependable. When he did not show up, people noticed. His loved ones reported him missing on February 2nd, and the detectives opened yet another missing person file. On April 16, 2020, the detectives finally got a court order to obtain Loverin's DNA. It matched the 1999 crime scene. On April 30th, a grand jury indicted Loverin for Mark's slaying. Just 4 days later, the U.S. Marshals arrested him. The police searched his southeast Portland home on May 6th. They expected to find evidence related to Mark's case. Instead, they uncovered a horror. Inside a shed on Loverin's property, they found dismembered human remains stuffed in containers. The remains belonged to Kenneth Griffin, the man who vanished only months earlier. The investigators also suspect there may be other victims based on items recovered from Loverin's property. In court, the prosecutors described Loverin as a predator, someone who lured men into his home and then took their lives. The full motive remains unclear. Whether it was for control, thrill, or something darker, only Loverin knows. On January 12, 2024, Loverin pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter in Mark's case, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In April 2024, he was convicted of second-degree slaying and abuse of a corpse in Kenneth's case. He was sentenced to life, to run consecutively with the manslaughter sentence, meaning he must serve 46 years before parole eligibility. The 1982 cold case of 2 Fremont, California cousins who were slain while walking home from a late-night visit to a 7-Eleven has been solved using the latest advances in DNA technology. In California, early in the morning of December 20, 1982, a 911 call was made to the Fremont police reporting a body located near the intersection of Green Valley Road and Scott Creek Road. When the officers arrived, they located the body of Jeffrey Flores Atup. It was immediately apparent, based on visible injuries, that his life was ended. While the investigators were on the scene, they received another call of a person down near the intersection of Hunter Road and Mission Boulevard. The officers responded and found the body of Mary Jane Malatag. Her life was also ended. The 2 victims were identified as being cousins. The investigators were able to piece together a timeline of the teen's final hours. Jeffrey worked at the Sarah Theaters in Milpitas, and Mary was at the movie theater with some friends waiting for Jeffrey to get off work. Once he closed up the theater, they walked to a local 7-Eleven store off of North Able Road and purchased some food with Mary's friend. Mary and Jeffrey were last seen late the night walking northbound on North Able Road at approximately 12:35 a.m. It was believed that they were walking to the Atup family home on Horcayo Street in Milpitas, just outside San Jose. They never arrived, and after an extensive investigation, the case went cold. 17 years later, in 1999, the Fremont police detectives began to look at the case again. By this time, DNA was becoming more prevalent in investigating crimes. They located key DNA evidence, which was uploaded into the state and national DNA databases in an attempt to find a match to the offender. Unfortunately, there was no match. In 2018, after almost another 2 decades, the cold case detective Jacob Blass revisited the case. He determined that additional information was available that needed to be reviewed, and it was processed using advanced investigative genetic genealogy. The breakthrough came when Clifton Hudspeth, a man with a violent criminal history, was identified through genealogical matches as a possible suspect. Hudspeth's criminal history included violence, bank robberies, indecent assaults, and attempted slayings. Hudspeth had lived near the teen's last known location in Milpitas. His residence was a 4-minute drive from where Jeffrey's body was located, and he was seen in the area on the night of the crime. Once Hudspeth was identified as a potential suspect, it was discovered that he had passed away in October 1999 at age 48 as the result of a medical condition. To confirm his involvement, the authorities obtained a court order to exhume his remains from a cemetery in Santa Clara. DNA evidence was extracted from his remains, and through testing, he was confirmed as the prime suspect in the case. The detectives said that they believed that Hudspeth acted alone and was the only suspect. Because of this, the case has officially been closed in 2019. A motive for the crimes has not been publicly disclosed. The families of the two 16-year-old victims expressed deep relief and gratitude for finally knowing the truth about what happened to their loved ones. The family statement on Twitter read, "We are a family that has been grieving for almost 37 years. We are attempting to put our lives back together as we re-mourn the loss of our beloved Jeffrey Atup and Mary Jane Malatag. Our family over the years had lost hope in believing that we would ever have justice in knowing who did this and as to what had happened to them. The investigators believe that Hudspeth may have been involved in other crimes in and around the same time of this one. He was known to be in Arkansas and San Diego in the months preceding. Anyone with information is asked to please call the Fremont Police Department's cold case slaying detective, Jacob Blass, at 5107-906963. A man was stabbed till his end in 1985 in Oklahoma. It took more than 3 decades for the investigators to finally make progress in the case with the help of cigarette butts and fingerprints. In September 1985, Oklahoma City florist Paul Douglas Aikman lost his life violently in a lonely spot along the Turner Turnpike at a rest stop that no longer exists. He was only 35 years old. The medical examiners concluded that he was fatally stabbed. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agents found only a few clues at the crime scene: prints on the passenger door handle of the victim's red Pontiac and cigarette butts inside. This evidence allowed the investigators to develop a DNA profile of a suspect, but no matches were found at the time, and the case eventually went cold. More than 3 decades after the crime in 2019, the agents got a break when a suspect was identified from the DNA found on one of the butts. The DNA hit came from a search of CODIS. The DNA matched to then 55-year-old Earl Wilson. Criminalists then matched the fingerprint impression taken from the crime scene to Wilson. He was incarcerated in an Oklahoma prison for unrelated crimes. Attorney General Hunter said, "Advances in DNA technology are allowing authorities to take another look at these difficult cases. Just because cases go cold does not mean someone should not be held responsible, even after 3 decades." In June 2020, first-degree slaying charges have been filed against him. Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation's Director Ricky Adams said, "For 35 years, Paul Aikman's family has ached, not knowing who was responsible for his demise. 35 years have passed, but we have not forgotten about Paul. Thanks to science and determined police work by our agents and our cold case unit, we are pleased to announce that the suspect in Paul's case has been identified. In October 2021, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison." A John Doe found in 1974 was identified nearly 50 years later, thanks in large part to the tireless efforts of volunteer genealogists who cracked the case. On February 11, 1974, hikers discovered the remains of an unidentified male near rocks at the bottom of a steep slope above Geneva Road, a short distance from U.S. Highway 285 near Grant, Colorado. When the Park County law enforcement hiked to the scene, They discovered the remains were already decomposing and the man was not carrying any identification. The man was wearing blue jeans, a long-sleeve shirt, long johns, and boots. The forensic investigators determined he was between 30 and 60 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and weighed about 160 pounds. The man had passed away approximately 4 months prior to being discovered, sometime in the fall or early winter of 1973. The individual exhibited multiple blunt force injuries and suffered multiple fractures believed to result from a fall or intentional jump from a plateau. With no identification or vehicle present, the individual remained a John Doe. He became known as Park County John Doe. The case went cold after a month, and the man was buried in an anonymous grave in Fairplay Cemetery. The case was reopened after Park County Coroner David E. Kintz Jr. took office in 2011. In 2017, more than 4 decades later, the remains were exhumed to obtain DNA. Initially, standard methods yielded no leads, and the all-volunteer organization DNA Doe Project was enlisted to help in 2019. From there, the case took off. DNA was processed through Astria Forensics for extraction, Hudson Alpha Discovery for whole genome sequencing, and Sabre Investigations for profile development. The DNA profile was uploaded to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. After nearly 800 hours of volunteer genealogical research, the team built extensive family trees, overcoming records scarcity, especially of Eastern European Jewish heritage. Ultimately, a first-cousin match confirmed the identity. The man was finally identified in 2020, nearly 47 years after he was found, as Anthony John Armbrust III. Anthony was born in 1929 in Ohio and spent most of his youth there before moving to San Diego, California. The Park County Coroner's Office said that Anthony was 44 at the time of his demise. He was an aeronautical engineer and leader of a metaphysical church in San Diego. He moved to Golden, Colorado, with his second wife, Renee, shortly before his demise. The last the couple was heard from was in 1973 when they sent a letter to members of his church asking if they could come and get their German Shepherd puppy and belongings. Members of the church did as they were asked. They came to Golden immediately. They found the apartment empty. They took the few remaining items and the German Shepherd puppy, who was in good health. That was the last time anyone heard from the Armbrusts. The couple was never reported missing. They had a daughter who lives in Arizona. The Park County coroner said that she had been notified of her father's identification. The investigators believed that Anthony, suffering from a terminal illness, and Renee traveled to the Colorado mountains with intent to end their lives together. Despite searches, Renee has never been found and is presumed to have lost her life in the same pact. Following his identification, the authorities and developers of the case emphasized the importance of giving Anthony his name and story, ensuring he was no longer an unknown marker in a cemetery. A Greenville, South Carolina man was finally sentenced in a 2015 cold case. In the neighborhood of Michael Drive in Greenville, South Carolina, the evening of October 15, 2015, turned into a scene of chaos. Firefighters rushed to a home engulfed in flames. When the smoke cleared, the investigators discovered something far more sinister than an accidental fire: a badly decomposed body, wrapped in a tarp and blankets, hidden in the basement. That body belonged to Cecil Sandy Sanders Morris, a 58-year-old man known for his easygoing nature. At first glance, the authorities suspected foul play. An autopsy confirmed their fears. Sandy had been shot twice in the back of the neck before the fire was set. The blaze was not an accident, it was a cover-up. The detectives immediately began searching for leads. Sandy's home showed signs of an attempt to destroy evidence, and his vehicle was missing. His neighbors reported seeing a man coming and going from the house, but the tips soon dried up. Despite early efforts, the case went cold for years, with no arrests and no clear suspect. By 2016, the following year, the file was collecting dust. Sandy's family was left heartbroken, with no answers and no justice. 5 years after the case was opened, in 2020, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office launched a new cold case unit dedicated to revisiting unsolved cases. Sandy's case was one of the first on their list. The detectives dug into old evidence, hoping modern forensic technology and renewed investigation could yield results. It worked. A fresh review of surveillance footage from the time of the fire showed something crucial. Jason Travis Merrill, a man with a criminal record and Sandy's former roommate, was driving Sandy's vehicle in the days following the incident. Merrill's DNA was also found inside a glove recovered at the scene, which also had the victim's biological material on it. Further investigation revealed more damning evidence. Merrill had visited the crime scene after the fire. The victim's car was later found hidden at a relative's home in Brevard, North Carolina. The detectives pieced together the timeline. Merrill and Sandy had a dispute while living together. At some point between October 11th and October 15th, Merrill shot Sandy twice in the neck, wrapped his body in a tarp, and left it in the basement. To destroy evidence, he set the house on fire and fled in Sandy's car. It was reported that Merrill had flown to California between October 18th and October 28th. He was seen on surveillance videos returning to Michael Drive on October 30th, driving the victim's vehicle and leaving several hours later. The deputies believed that Merrill then went to a relative's home in Brevard, North Carolina, the same home where he would be taken into custody on November 20th, 2020. He was extradited to South Carolina and charged with second-degree slaying and arson. Sandy's vehicle was also recovered at the Brevard residence, and forensic analysis linked Merrill to items at the crime scene. The case finally reached its conclusion on November 5, 2024, when Merrill pleaded guilty in court. The judge sentenced the 48-year-old man to 35 years in prison, bringing long-awaited justice to Sandy's family. The officials said that he will serve his sentence in the South Carolina Department of Corrections facility. For Sandy's loved ones, it was bittersweet closure after nearly a decade of unanswered questions. One family member said with tears streaming down their face, "We finally have justice. Sandy can rest now." Dentures found at the scene of an indecent assault led the detectives to the man responsible for ending the lives of 2 women who were found in Fraser, Tennessee. On October 22, 2001, 2 teens had been out hunting when they made a gruesome discovery. The body of 46-year-old Nancy Carol Alvis was found in a weed-filled area off Old Millington Road in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis, Tennessee. Her decomposed body was identified by her dental records. According to the medical examiner, she had been strangled weeks earlier. While the sheriff's investigators were busy doing the follow-up work the next day, they discovered a second body. The body of 37-year-old Patricia Cook Thornton. The medical examiners determined that she had been stabbed and that she had been deceased for about 2 days. Both victims were found nude, except for wearing shoes. Both women were known to frequent Harpo's Bar on Highway 51, a gathering spot where Patricia was especially known, and the last known location they were seen alive. In the years that followed, the investigators considered the possibility that these 2 cases were linked to a serial perpetrator, particularly Samuel Little, who confessed to ending the lives of over 90 women by strangulation. However, no direct evidence ever linked him to these cases. Another possible suspect at the time was Thomas Maupin, but he was not charged. He admitted to often taking women to the end of Old Millington Road to have intercourse for money. Maupin said that he knew both women as frequent customers of Harpo's Bar. Despite all efforts, the case went cold. In a separate indecent assault case in August 2001, just a few weeks before Nancy and Patricia's bodies were found, in North Memphis, the police were called to the 1200 block of Thomas Street. A woman claimed that she was approached by a man. He parked his car and started walking with her. Moments later, he forced her into an alley, stabbed her with a metal object that pierced through her chin into the roof of her mouth. He then used that object to indecently assault her and forced her to perform acts. She survived the brutal attack and consented to an assault examination. The detectives found dentures at the crime scene with a man's name on them. They were bagged and, along with the assault kit, placed in a Memphis Police Department property room where they sat for years. In 2013, more than a decade later, a citywide initiative in Memphis to clear the backlog of untested kits began. In 2016, this case's dentures and assault kit were finally sent to a state lab for testing. Not only was DNA found, but the investigators also learned that those dentures were made for a man while he was in prison in 1988, serving a 12-year sentence for taking the life of a 6-year-old girl, Trickna Cloy, in Washington state. The dentures belonged to Thomas Maupin, one of the previous suspects in the case. He pled guilty to the assault of the woman a year later and started serving an 8-year sentence at Trousdale Turner Correctional Center in Hartsville, about 50 miles northeast of Nashville. Maupin went to Memphis after he served the 12-year sentence. He was twice convicted and sentenced to 40 years, but the convictions were overturned on appeal, and he was released in 1997 after pleading guilty to a lesser charge. The solving of the cold case assault from August 2001 led to a reopening of the unsolved October 2001 case of Nancy and Patricia. The sheriff's office was finally able to pin Maupin to the case. On June 10, 2020, he was indicted on 2 counts of first-degree slaying. Helen Tuttle, Nancy's sister, said, "I went out to the cemetery to let her know. She knows that I fought long enough, long and hard, and I would never give up. It has been years of uncertainty, and finally, justice is in reach." Marcine Gibson, Patricia's aunt, said, "I believe God will make sure he gets what he deserves." The 2 women are remembered as loving and selfless. They were both mothers. Helen said, "She loved her kids more than anything in the world." He walked free all of those years. In 2021, 20 years after the crime took place, the families of the 2 victims got to face the man responsible for their brutal end. Then, 71-year-old Maupin admitted to ending the lives of Patricia and Nancy. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. Prosecuting attorney Eric Christensen said, "We had to make a reduction because a number of key witnesses had passed away during the last 20 years. Our primary goal was accountability. We wanted him to admit to what he did." Maupin, who entered court in a wheelchair, will get 12 years behind bars, which will start after 2 more years served for the 2001 assault case. He will be eligible for parole after serving 30% of the 12 years. The district attorney's office said that they will fight to make sure he does not get out. Lisa Gwathney, Patricia's sister, said, "I just hope he feels some kind of remorse. From the look on his face, it looks like he did not have remorse. People like that do not even have a soul." The remains of a woman found in Georgia almost 40 years ago have finally been identified, and the investigators said that they suspect she was the victim of one of the nation's most prolific serial offenders. On September 28, 1981, unidentified remains of an African-American woman were found alongside Interstate 24 in Dade County, Georgia, near the Tennessee border. She was estimated to be in her late 20s or early 30s. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation kept the case open, but with limited leads and no identification, it gradually went cold. In 2018, almost 4 decades later, the notorious serial perpetrator Samuel Little, already serving life sentences, confessed to ending the life of a young black woman in Chattanooga in the early 1980s. His detailed recollections included the location and circumstances of the crime. Hamilton County, Tennessee officials could not find matching unsolved cases, so they collaborated with the GBI in Georgia. The description aligned with the 1981 remains. GBI investigators flew to Texas in December 2018 to interview Little, who reinforced their belief that the remains were indeed of the woman he ended the life of after meeting her in Chattanooga. On March 19, 2019, the Hamilton County Cold Case Unit held a press briefing, revealing a clay reconstruction of the victim's face and appealing for public assistance. A family member recognized the reconstruction and contacted the authorities. DNA samples confirmed in October 2020 that the victim was 30-year-old Patricia Parker, a woman from Chattanooga. According to the FBI, Little has confessed to ending the lives of 5 women in the Georgia-Tennessee area, including Patricia Parker, and he has confessed to strangling 93 victims between 1970 and 2005. Little targeted women from vulnerable groups, including women who were involved in prostitution or suffering from substance addiction. He is currently serving 3 life sentences in California. Patricia's family has been looking for her for 30-plus years. Her son took comfort knowing that his mom did not just leave him. In December 2000, a man set out for a hunting trip on Lake Seminole in Florida. By nightfall, he had vanished. His mother's persistence eventually revealed a web of lies, a secret affair, and a profit scheme. Jerry Michael "Mike" Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, Florida, north of Tallahassee. He was the son of Jerry Jerome Williams, a Greyhound bus driver, and Cheryl Williams, who ran a daycare. From a young age, Mike stood out both in academics and in his ability to connect with people. At North Florida Christian High School, he was not only an outstanding student, but also served as student body president, earning the admiration of his classmates, who voted him best personality. In addition to his academic achievements, Mike was a talented athlete, excelling on the football field. At the age of 15, he developed a love for duck hunting, a pastime that would become one of his lifelong passions. His dedication extended beyond sports and hobbies. He had a clear vision for his future. After graduating high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he pursued a degree in political science and urban planning, determined to build a successful and meaningful career. It was during his teenage years that Mike met Denise Merrill, a vibrant cheerleader who captured the hearts of many and was later crowned homecoming queen. The two began dating in high school, and their relationship blossomed over the years. Their romance eventually led to marriage in 1994, solidifying their bond. In 1999, their joy expanded with the birth of their daughter, Ansley. Following his graduation from Florida State University, he began working for the Ketchum Appraisal Group as a property appraiser. His tireless work ethic quickly became well known. Mike often put in 15-hour days, determined to excel in his profession and secure a comfortable life for his wife and daughter. The Williams family lived in an upscale subdivision on the east side of Tallahassee, surrounded by a community that admired their seemingly perfect life. Their home was a reflection of their hard work and shared dreams. Mike and Denise had even begun making plans to expand their family and had talked about traveling to Hawaii to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary. The future appeared bright, full of promise and excitement. Yet, beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, an unseen shadow loomed. Mike could not have known that danger was drawing closer, nor that the plans and dreams he held so dearly were about to be shattered. On December 16, 2000, 31-year-old Mike told Denise that he wants to go duck hunting, but would be home in time for their planned vacation. The couple had been looking forward to a trip to Apalachicola, Florida, to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary. However, when noon arrived, and Denise still had not heard from her husband, her concern quickly grew. She began calling friends to see if anyone had seen or heard from Mike, and asked for their help in locating him. Wasting no time, she also contacted the police, and a search for Mike was immediately set into motion. The search unfolded over several hours, but daylight soon faded, making the task more difficult. Even in the darkness, searchers made a discovery. Mike's small, motorized canoe was found along the shore of Lake Seminole. Not far from the water, about 75 yards away, they located his Ford Bronco. The vehicle appeared to be parked neatly, but there was no trace of Mike himself. The scene raised many questions, but offered no clear answers. The authorities continued their search in the days, weeks, and eventually months that followed. Their efforts turned up several of Mike's belongings. His hunting license, jacket, and waders were recovered from the bottom of Lake Seminole, leading the investigators to believe that he may have drowned. Operating under that assumption, the police expected his body to surface within a few days, as often happens in drowning cases. When days passed without a body being recovered, suspicion grew, but the investigators found an explanation they deemed plausible. Lake Seminole was known to have a large alligator population, and the police theorized that it was possible Mike had been attacked and consumed by the animals. The lack of a body or additional evidence meant the case could go no further at that time, and it was officially classified as a missing person investigation. For years, the case remained stagnant, with no new leads or breakthroughs. Mike's absence weighed heavily on those who knew him, but the official investigation made little progress and eventually went cold. 6 months after Mike's disappearance, Denise petitioned Leon Circuit Judge to have him declared legally deceased. The judge granted her request, formalizing the declaration. Denise later told friends and family that she fully believed Mike was gone. The man who had once been her high school sweetheart and devoted husband was, in the eyes of the law, no longer alive, though the truth about what had really happened to him remained hidden. As the official investigation stalled, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, refused to accept the conclusion that her son had drowned in Lake Seminole. She firmly believed that Mike was alive and that the truth behind his disappearance had yet to be uncovered. Determined to find answers, she took matters into her own hands, pursuing leads on her own, speaking to people connected to the case, and even cross-checking their stories. Cheryl conducted an independent investigation, gathering information and refusing to let her son's case be forgotten. Her relentless efforts eventually made an impact. In 2010, a decade after Mike vanished, the authorities reclassified his disappearance as a suspicious demise. The case was reopened and assigned to a team of cold case investigators. This decision was heavily influenced by Cheryl's persistence and the new pieces of information that she had uncovered over the years. The new investigators began re-examining the evidence and interviewed witnesses with fresh eyes, determined to find out whether foul play had been involved. One of the most significant findings was financial. The police learned that following Mike's disappearance, Denise had received $1.75 million from his life insurance policies. Adding to their concerns, they discovered that in 2005, Denise had married Brian Winchester, Mike's best friend. This revelation deepened suspicions about whether Mike's demise was an accident at all. The investigators began to question many aspects of the original inquiry and whether key details had been overlooked. When the cold case team reviewed the circumstances surrounding the recovery of Mike's boat, several troubling inconsistencies emerged. The boat's engine was found switched off, yet its gas tank was still full. According to the manufacturer, if the engine had been running when Mike fell overboard, it should have continued running until the fuel was used up. This suggested that someone had deliberately turned off the engine. There were also questions about Mike's behavior on the day he disappeared. Friends and family told the investigators that Mike almost never hunted alone, yet he had supposedly gone to the lake without a companion that morning. The location of his truck also raised red flags. It was parked in an area that would have required him to drag his boat through mud, even though there was a nearby concrete ramp that would have made launching much easier. The recovery of Mike's waders, jacket, and flashlight added another layer of suspicion. These items were found at the bottom of the lake, mixed with torn weeds and alligator excrement, shortly after his disappearance. However, the cold case investigators began to suspect that the items may have been intentionally placed there to reinforce the drowning theory. Despite these troubling discoveries, there was still no physical evidence or DNA linking anyone to Mike's disappearance, leaving the case shrouded in uncertainty. A major breakthrough came 6 years later, in 2016, when years of unanswered questions finally began to unravel. By that time, Denise and Brian had separated, and Denise had filed for divorce. She no longer wanted to be with him, but their relationship took a darker turn that summer. In the early hours of August 5, 2016, at around 2:30 a.m., Brian hid in the trunk of Denise's SUV. When she opened it, she found him armed with a gun. The tense situation only ended when Denise promised to stay with him. Immediately afterward, she went to the police and filed a kidnapping report, setting in motion a chain of events that would finally expose the truth about Mike's fate. Brian was arrested and questioned in relation to the kidnapping. During the interrogation, The investigators also asked him about Mike's disappearance. It was then that Brian made a shocking confession. The day that Mike was reported missing, he had been with him on the lake and knew exactly what had happened. He admitted that he had shot Mike. This confession opened the door for the prosecutors to push for justice in a case that had been cold for over a decade. Believing that Denise had also been involved in Mike's demise, the prosecutors faced a challenge. Without Brian's testimony, the lack of physical evidence would make convicting her nearly impossible. They offered Brian a plea deal. He would receive immunity from prosecution for Mike's slaying in exchange for testifying against Denise. In return, he would be sentenced to 20 years in prison, but only for the kidnapping charge. Brian accepted the deal, agreeing to tell the full story and lead the police to Mike's remains. True to his word, Brian directed the investigators to the location of Mike's body. It was found exactly where he had said it would be, along the shores of Carr Lake in Leon County, near Tallahassee. The remains revealed that Mike had been shot in the head. This discovery brought long-awaited closure to the mystery of his disappearance, though it also confirmed the violent reality of his demise. Denise was arrested and charged with conspiracy to end a life, first-degree slaying, and being an accessory after the fact. The prosecutors argued that Mike's demise was the result of a deliberate plan carried out by both Brian and Denise. While Brian had pulled the trigger, they claimed the crime had been orchestrated together, motivated by their secret romantic relationship and the nearly $2 million in life insurance they stood to gain. During the trial, Brian testified in detail about the origins of the plan. He claimed the idea came to him during a hunting trip with Mike, when Mike accidentally fell into a mud hole. The ground had collapsed beneath him, trapping him like quicksand, and Brian had helped him escape. Later, he told Denise about the incident, remarking that if he had not been there to help, Mike would likely have lost his life, and no one would have ever known what happened. According to the prosecutors, this conversation marked the beginning of a fatal conspiracy that would end with Mike's life being ended on Lake Seminole. Brian testified about his relationship with Denise, saying, "We were Bonnie and Clyde. We were partners in crime." Denise suggested staging a boating accident on the Gulf of Mexico where they could throw both Mike and Brian's wife, Kathy Thomas, overboard. But Brian did not want to end the life of his children's mother. In December 2018, both Denise Williams and Brian Winchester were convicted on all counts. 2 months later, in February 2019, Denise was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 30 years. 5 months after Denise's sentencing, a legal arrangement shifted the financial outcome of the case. Mike and Denise's daughter Ansley was awarded all assets from her late father's estate, as well as the life insurance proceeds that had originally gone to Denise. This transfer occurred after Denise signed over the funds to avoid prosecution on 3 counts of insurance fraud. The agreement stipulated that Ansley could not use any of the money to cover her mother's legal fees. If she violated this condition, she would be required to pay a $150,000 penalty to the state. Following her conviction, Denise was sent to the Florida Women's Reception Center to begin serving her sentence. Her legal team, however, continued to challenge the outcome. In January 2020, Denise filed an appeal with the Florida First District Court of Appeal, arguing through her attorney that there was insufficient evidence to prove that she had been involved in the actual commission of Mike's crime. The appeal brought a partial victory for Denise in November 2020. While the court upheld her conviction for conspiracy to end a life, along with the 30-year sentence that accompanied it, it overturned her first-degree slaying conviction. This decision significantly reduced her legal liability for the crime itself, though it did not set her free. In April 2021, the legal battle continued when Florida's Attorney General sought to challenge the reversal of the conviction. The state petitioned the Florida Supreme Court, citing conflicting legal precedents and state constitutional provisions in an effort to have the conviction reinstated. However, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case, effectively leaving the appellate court's ruling in place. With that decision, Denise remained convicted only of conspiracy to end a life, serving a 30-year sentence for her role in the plot that ended Mike's life. While the slaying conviction had been set aside, The court's decision ensured that her part in the scheme, and the betrayal of her husband, remained a matter of legal record. The long and tangled case had finally reached its legal conclusion, though the emotional toll on all involved, particularly Mike's family, was immeasurable. Mike's mother said the following after the verdict: "When I go to bed at night and I try to go to sleep, I see Michael clinging to that stump in the lake, and I hear him calling, 'Help! Help!'" In December 1994, Long Branch, New Jersey police entered an apartment to a harrowing scene. A woman's body was found, and her 2 young children were found unharmed nearby. Another crime would happen 6 months later. The 2 cases, linked by family ties, would haunt the Long Branch community for decades. Ana Mejia was born around 1969. She had a close bond with her family, especially her sister, Dolores Mejia, a relationship that remained constant throughout her life. By her mid-20s, Ana was a devoted mother to 2 young children, aged 1 and 3. She lived in a modest apartment on Prospect Street in Long Branch, New Jersey, where she balanced the demands of caring for her children with the responsibilities of running her household. On December 8, 1994, 24-year-old Ana was found deceased in the bedroom of her apartment. Her 2 young children, aged 1 and 3, were found inside the home unharmed. The authorities determined that she had been stabbed multiple times, and a white powdery substance was discovered on her face. This substance was later identified as baby formula. For Ana's loved ones, the violence was unimaginable, and the questions it raised offered little comfort. The crime was investigated, but even in its early stages, no clear suspect emerged. The presence of her children, unharmed but witnesses to their mother's final moments, only deepened the tragedy. As the investigators worked to understand the motive, the case quickly became one of the most disturbing in Long Branch's history. Just 5 months later, on May 14, 1995, another devastating blow struck the same family. Nicholas Connors, 51 years old and the husband of Dolores, Ana's sister, was shot multiple times in the head. His wife discovered his body after returning home from her job at a nursing home in Freehold. The violence was swift and fatal, echoing the suddenness of Ana's case and leaving the family reeling from a second loss in less than a year. The 2 cases were quickly linked by the investigators. The connection was clear. Ana was the sister of Nicholas's wife, and Nicholas had been Ana's brother-in-law. Law enforcement publicly acknowledged the possibility of a link between the cases, yet no names were released as potential suspects. As months turned to years, the cases grew cold, leaving nearly 22 years of uncertainty for a family who had already endured the unimaginable twice. The long-awaited breakthrough came when the case was reopened in 2017 by a newly formed cold case squad. Years of unanswered questions finally began to yield new leads. By January 2020, the authorities announced the arrest of 66-year-old Dolores Morgan, her 47-year-old son Theodore Ted Connors, and 48-year-old Jose R. Carrero. Dolores being the sister of Ana and wife of Nicholas, and Ted being Nicholas's adoptive son. The investigators said that they had linked all 3 to the fatal cases of Ana and Nicholas. According to reports at the time, both Connors and Carrero had confided in several friends about the crimes. The turning point in the investigation was the discovery of a previously overlooked transcript from September 1995. This document captured a recorded conversation between Connors and a friend, in which the subject of the crimes was discussed. In addition, late in 2019, some of the suspects' friends came forward with new statements to the police, further strengthening the case. In January 2020, a grand jury indicted Morgan and Connors on 2 counts each of first-degree slaying. The prosecutors alleged that the mother and son were central figures in orchestrating the crimes, with Carrero assisting in carrying it out. The state's narrative was that Ana's crime had been an act of retribution, fueled by the belief that she, as a confidential informant, was preparing to betray Morgan by setting up her substance-dealing boyfriend. The prosecutors alleged that Nicholas's life was ended over a $200,000 life insurance policy that Morgan collected after his demise. The prosecution's theory held that Morgan had directed both fatal attacks, with Connors and Carrero acting as her enforcers. They argued that Anna's cooperation with law enforcement posed a serious threat to Morgan's interests, and Nicholas's demise followed as part of the broader scheme. The defense, however, pushed back hard, questioning the credibility of the state's cooperating witnesses and dismissing the testimony as the work of a self-serving snitch seeking personal gain. After a weeks-long trial in October 2021, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. The outcome meant no resolution for the families or the community, but the prosecutors quickly announced their intention to retry the case, keeping the decades-old pursuit of justice alive. In 2024, the third defendant, Jose R. Carrero, chose to resolve his case by pleading to lesser charges. As part of his agreement, he cooperated with the prosecutors and admitted to conspiring with the others in relation to ending the life of Anna. Consistently described in coverage as a cooperating co-defendant, Carrero's testimony had been central to the state's case. That same year, he was sentenced to 14 years in state prison, marking the only substantial incarceration among the three defendants. For Dolores Morgan and Theodore Connors, the legal outcome was far different. Following the hung jury in the 2021 trial and a lengthy period of pre-retrial negotiations, both ultimately avoided slaying convictions. In 2024, they pleaded guilty to hindering, a charge significantly less severe than the original counts they faced. The decision marked a sharp turn in a case that had once been framed as a pursuit of justice for two cases. By February 2024, a judge indicated that he would not impose any additional prison time on Morgan and Connors. Instead, he signaled his intent to sentence them to time served, recognizing the years they had already spent in custody during the legal process. For some, the shift in charges and the expected outcome raised questions about the strength of the state's evidence and the compromises often made in complex, decades-old prosecutions. When sentencing took place in April 2024, Morgan and Connors were given probationary sentences. Both walked out of court that day, leaving behind the charges that had shadowed them for years. For them, the case was over in a legal sense, but for others, the resolution felt incomplete. In October 1995, the burnt-out shell of a white Mazda van was discovered on the central coast of New South Wales in Australia. Another crime would take place, but a resolution would only take place decades later. Ronald Richard Penn was born in 1936. His family base was in Inverell, a town in northern New South Wales. However, Ronald often found himself on the move, traveling back and forth to Wyong on the central coast of New South Wales. Ronald was known as a big man, both in physical stature and in personality. He carried himself with a presence that made him stand out, and people around him recognized that he was not someone who could be easily intimidated. In 1995, Ronald became directly involved in a serious legal matter. He was due to give evidence in relation to an apprehended violence order. His role in this case was critical, as he stood as a key witness who could provide important testimony in a violent dispute. The significance of his expected appearance in court placed him in a position of responsibility that carried real weight. When 61-year-old Ronald failed to return home as expected, his family immediately grew concerned. His absence was unusual and troubling, and those closest to him could not ignore the sense that something was wrong. Their unease eventually led them to take formal action by filing a missing person report with the police. Once alerted, the police authorities began their investigation into Ronald's disappearance. Their task was to determine what had happened to him and why he had not appeared in court. The investigation quickly focused on his last known movements and the people connected to him at the time. During their inquiries, the police learned that Ronald had last been seen at a home in Bateau Bay. This location was significant, as he was expected to attend court soon afterward. However, he never arrived at the courthouse, and his unexplained absence raised alarm about what might have taken place between the time he was last seen and the time he was expected to appear. The search for answers continued until October 1995, when the investigators made a chilling discovery. Ronald's white Mazda van was found burnt out in bushland near Berkeley Vale. The site of the vehicle was only a few kilometers from the home in Bateau Bay, where he had last been seen alive, making the discovery all the more disturbing. Inside the destroyed vehicle, the police found some of Ronald's personal documents and belongings. Rather than offering reassurance, these items heightened concerns. The condition of the van and the presence of his personal effects pointed toward the likelihood of foul play, deepening the suspicion that Ronald's disappearance was not voluntary and that something far more sinister had occurred. On November 21, 1995, violence struck at the Wyong courthouse, where the same AVO hearing Ronald had been scheduled to attend was taking place. As a 24-year-old woman, Jennifer Forgatch arrived to attend the matter. She was shot and seriously injured. Although she survived the attack, the incident shocked the community and intensified questions about the dangerous circumstances surrounding the case. At the scene, the police quickly arrested a 24-year-old man and charged him with attempted slaying and firearms offenses. However, when the matter went to trial, the accused was acquitted on the grounds of mental illness. Even with this outcome, the shooting underscored the volatile nature of the dispute and raised concerns about the safety of others connected to the case. Given the timing and the shared link to the AVO hearing, the investigators turned their attention to a possible connection between Ronald's disappearance and the courthouse shooting. The police believed that the two cases could not be separated, as Ronald was expected to testify in the same matter. The working suspicion became that Ronald's life may have been ended deliberately to silence him and prevent his evidence from being heard. For years, the police dedicated resources to uncovering the truth. Strike Force Rank More was established to focus solely on solving Ronald's disappearance. The investigators conducted numerous searches in the bushland around Bateau Bay and Berkeley Vale, areas already tied to his last known movements. Despite these efforts, Ronald's body was never located, leaving the case unresolved and his family without answers. In May 2014, nearly 2 decades after he vanished, the police acted on new information. Specialist search officers and a cadaver dog were deployed to the Tagara Lakes area in the hope of finding Ronald's remains. The renewed search brought brief hope, but once again, no trace of him was discovered. The absence of physical evidence continued to weigh heavily on both the investigators and Ronald's loved ones. Then, in 2015, a breakthrough came when the police arrested Graham Thomas Sales. He was charged with ending the life of Ronald, as well as the attempted slaying relating to the Wyong courthouse shooting of Jennifer. Sales admitted to soliciting his younger brother, Ross Alfred Shane Sales, to end the life of Jennifer. Sales is already serving a 37-year jail term for the reign of terror he waged against his domestic partners and others between 1988 and his arrest in 2015. 5 years later, in May 2020, Sales pleaded guilty to both cases by saying, "Guilty, thank you." His admission closed the legal chapter of the cold case, but he never revealed where Ronald's body was hidden. This left the Penn family with only partial closure. Justice had been served in court, but the pain of not recovering his remains still lingers. After a 5-year investigation, the authorities in Indiana have sentenced a man from Kentucky. Rochelle Thomas Stubblefield was a 20-year-old college student attending Calumet College of St. Joseph in Whiting, Indiana, where she was studying criminal justice. She was ambitious, loved by her family, and preparing for one of the most important moments of her life, becoming a mother. In November 2015, Rochelle was 8 months pregnant and just weeks away from giving birth. On the evening of November 10th, Rochelle attended a basketball game at her college. It was an ordinary night, and there was no indication of what was to come. After the game, Rochelle left campus, and then she disappeared. When Rochelle failed to return home and missed calls from her family, concern quickly grew. 2 days later, on November 12th, her mother reported her missing. This was completely out of character for Rochelle, who was known to stay in close contact with her family, especially during her pregnancy. The police immediately launched an investigation. They soon discovered Rochelle's abandoned vehicle in Gary, Indiana. Inside the car were her broken eyeglasses, and nearby the investigators found a pair of red and black shoes believed to belong to Rochelle. These discoveries strongly suggested foul play. From the beginning, the detectives focused on Darren Fuller, a man Rochelle had been dating and who was believed to be the father of her unborn child. When questioned, Darren denied knowing Rochelle and claimed that he was not the father of her baby. His responses raised suspicion, but without a body or direct evidence, the investigators had little to move forward with. Months passed, and hopes of finding Rochelle alive began to fade. Her due date came and went, with no sign of her. Despite extensive searches, including areas around Gary, the police found no trace of Rochelle or her unborn child. The case eventually went cold. For years, her family continued to push for answers while the investigators quietly worked behind the scenes, hoping for a breakthrough. A break in the case came in 2019, nearly 4 years after Rochelle vanished. The detectives re-interviewed individuals connected to Darren Fuller, including a woman he had been dating at the time of Rochelle's disappearance. During this interview, the woman revealed critical information. Fuller had confessed to ending Rochelle's life. According to her statement, Fuller told her that during an argument he choked Rochelle and later disposed of her belongings by throwing them out of a car window near the area where her vehicle had been discovered. He also told her that he had buried Rochelle's body near an elementary school in Gary. The police acted on this lead, conducting multiple searches of the school grounds, even using cadaver dogs. While dogs indicated possible human remains, no body was ever recovered. As the investigation continued, additional witnesses came forward, including Fuller's own relatives. Several of them told the investigators that Fuller admitted to ending Rochelle's life because he did not want to pay child support. One witness recalled Fuller saying that he had both strangled and stabbed Rochelle before disposing of her body. On the strength of these statements and corroborating evidence, the police arrested Fuller in July 2020. He was charged with 2 counts of slaying, one for Rochelle and one for her unborn child. Fuller pleaded not guilty, and the case proceeded to trial. Despite the absence of Rochelle's body, the prosecutors presented a strong case built on witness testimony, Fuller's own statements, and circumstantial evidence. In April 2023, a Lake County jury found Fuller guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 95 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. Fuller's motion for a new trial was denied. Throughout the proceedings, Fuller maintained his innocence and has never revealed the location of Rochelle's remains. To this day, her body has not been found. Her family has justice, but not closure. They continue to hope that one day her remains will be located so she can be laid to rest. It took about 3 decades to bring some sort of closure to a Texas cold case. On September 10, 1990, at approximately 5 p.m., a man traveling along Highway 288 to Manville, Texas, had pulled over to the side of Brazoria County Road in order to relieve himself. He noticed a pile of debris and decided to investigate further. He had stepped behind a barricade and had discovered what was a human skull sitting inside of a tire, with the rest of the disarticulated skeleton laying underneath. The victim lay naked of any identification or clothing, except for a few eye-catching pieces of jewelry. Among them was a simple pearl bracelet, several rings, and most notably, a 1975 high school class ring with a bright blue stone from Robert E. Lee High School in Houston, Texas. With no name to call her, the investigators and the community began referring to the case as Princess Blue, inspired by that vivid sapphire-like ring. It is assumed that this ring was a gift from an older companion or relative. A detective had taken the jewelry and placed it in an evidence envelope. The medical examiner's findings added little clarity. The victim was believed to be Hispanic, between 15 and 19 years old, her height at 4 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 2 inches. An upper left front tooth had been surgically removed, 2 fractured ribs, and a defect on a bone beneath her left knee. No traces of opiates were found in her bone marrow. There was nothing to help identify her, no purse, clothes, or ID. Foul play was most likely suspected based on the circumstances of discovery. Eventually, the case went cold. In August 2006, almost 16 years later, a detective reopened the case file. DNA advances had disputed the previous speculation that she was of Hispanic descent or white with a Hispanic admixture. Testing indicated that she was instead white, but someone with African DNA had recently entered into her family, which was most likely a parent or grandparent. It was also discovered that the female could have been as old as 21. Efforts to identify the young woman relied in part on an investigative lead, the distinctive ring. The detectives reached out to Robert E. Lee High School's 1975 alumni, over half of the graduating class, but no one recognized the ring or the sketches created from the remains. Media coverage brought renewed attention the following year, in June 2007, when the authorities released sketches and details about the ring. Many leads came in, but none had the answer to the identity of the victim. In July of that same year, the investigators started to suspect serial offender Roy Allen Stewart might have been a possible suspect based on his presence in towns where females of a similar age bracket disappeared. Princess Blue's time of demise fits in with his time spans. Stewart refused to cooperate with the authorities and falsely stated he was in prison in 1989 and 1990. He said that he had not recognized the sketches and that he had been innocent after his release. He is, however, no longer a person of interest in the case. The case remained unsolved for another 12 years. Then, in November 2019, ABC 13's 13 Unsolved series reignited public interest and prompted renewed investigative efforts. The breakthrough arrived in June 2020, not through the ring or sketches, but via the power of DNA. Julie Gwen Davis, who had disappeared from Orange, Texas, was finally connected to the remains when her brother, Danny, had submitted his own DNA to help identify missing family members. The DNA perfectly matched the remains of Princess Blue with 99.9% certainty, revealing her true identity after 3 decades. With the identification confirmed, Julie's remains were returned to her family. Her siblings, including Danny and Stephanie, finally had the chance to lay her to rest and begin the grieving and healing process. Stephanie later spoke about keeping Julie close, wearing a purple t-shirt that read, "Who was Princess Blue? My sister, Julie Gwen Davis," and placing some of her ashes in a locket as a personal tribute. While the identification brought long-sought closure, many questions remain unanswered. The circumstances of Julie's demise are not fully understood, and the authorities continue investigating the case. The Manvel Police Department has stated that they will not rest until they uncover what happened to Julie and whether her demise was the result of foul play. But the unidentified and missing persons case is solved. What was supposed to have been a good deed turned into a decision that will be regretted forever. On the night of June 22, 1991, in the quiet town of Magnolia, Delaware, 70-year-old Dorothy Donovan was brutally slain inside her own home. Dorothy was described by her family as a kind, gentle, loving, energetic woman who loved gardening, canning vegetables, babysitting her grandchildren, and going to church. She was twice widowed and had 3 grown children named Charles Holden, Brenda Alexander, and Diana Reinhardt. She lived in a farmhouse on the family's 163-acre farm near Harrington, Delaware. She lived alone but remained closely connected to her family, particularly her son, Charles, who worked at the DuPont Company factory and lived in an adjacent trailer on the farm. On the evening of June 22nd, Charles had finished a long shift at work. Driving home, he stopped briefly at a fast food restaurant, Hardee's. After doing so, he crossed the parking lot and got in his truck. As he began to back out, he noticed a stranger standing at the driver's side window. The man asked Charles for a ride. Charles told him he was unsure if he could since it was pretty late. The man said that he was in a big-time bind, that his sister had just had a baby at Milford Memorial Hospital, and he needed to get there. Charles told him that he lived nearby so he could not take him far, but in the end, he relented and agreed to take him part of the way. Harrington was a small town, mostly friendly. He assumed that he had nothing to worry about. When Charles reached the intersection at Killen Pond Road, where he normally turned to drive the half-mile home, he said that he pulled off to the side of the road and told the man that was as far as he could take him. Charles also pointed to a nearby phone booth and told him that he could call for a ride. He became angry, saying he needed to get down the road and would not get out of the truck. Charles told him that he could not go any further and reminded him that he had previously said he could only go a few miles. The man, even angrier, said, "Listen, I got a problem and I am not getting out of this truck." Charles apologized, but told him that he could not help and that he had to get out. Without warning, he attacked. He punched Charles in the face and demanded both money and the truck. He also picked up a screwdriver from the truck's floor. Charles grabbed his keys and jumped out. The man tried to drive off but realized Charles had taken the keys. He then got out of the truck and went after Charles. Charles ran to a nearby business named Blake's Garage for help. He banged on the windows, but no one was there. The man approached him and, wielding the screwdriver, said, "I am going to end you. I am going to end you right here." Once again, he demanded that Charles give him the truck. Charles told him to calm down and said that he would take him wherever he wanted to go. As he and the man headed back to the truck, Charles quickly got in the truck and drove off before the man could reach the passenger side door. Charles sped off. He drove around for a while till he did not see the man anywhere, so he decided to head back home. But when he reached his driveway, he saw him again. He was standing in Charles's yard, looking through his trailer's windows. Somehow, the man managed to make his way to Charles's home, the same property where his elderly mother lived. He rushed to a payphone and called the police at 1:19 a.m. While he was waiting for the police, he called Dorothy several times to alert her about the man. She did not answer. The police categorized the call as low priority. At 3 a.m., Corporal Myrna Williams Kinney of the Delaware State Police arrived at the payphone and met with Charles. Charles explained the situation to the officer, and they made their way to the trailer home. Once arrived, they checked the front and back doors on the trailer home to see if the man had broken into the home. Corporal Kinney found nothing amiss. Charles asked Corporal Kinney to look at Dorothy's house, which was about 60 feet away. They walked across the yard to the back door. They then discovered that the window to it was broken. They entered the house, and Charles called out to Dorothy, but there was no response. He knew something was wrong because she normally stayed awake until he came home. In an upstairs bedroom, Charles found Dorothy's body. She had been stabbed more than 24 times in the face, arms, and chest. The police believed that her life was ended at around 1 a.m. Her purse was untouched, and nothing appeared to be missing or out of place in the house. The police ruled out robbery and indecent assault as motives. Dorothy had no known enemies. Because Charles had been the last known family member connected to Dorothy and was involved in a violent encounter that night, suspicion quickly turned toward him. The police wondered if his story of the hitchhiker was a cover-up. It was hard for them to believe that he had picked up the man, taken him a couple of miles, dropped him off, and then somehow he showed up at Dorothy's house and ended her life, despite having never met her or Charles before. During questioning, the detectives told Charles that they did not believe his story. They did not think the man could have walked a half mile and happened upon Charles's trailer while he was driving around. They discovered that Dorothy had taken out a life insurance policy shortly before her demise and listed Charles as the beneficiary. They also learned that he was having financial problems at the time. Furthermore, he refused to take a polygraph test. The detectives did not believe Charles's story about the hitchhiker. It was not until they were able to go back and interview people at Hardee's that they determined that the man actually existed. Several people inside and outside the restaurant said that he had asked them for a ride. Some of them also saw him getting into Charles's truck. Witnesses reported seeing the man charging Charles at the intersection, and others witnessed the man walking around the trailer home before he made his way to Dorothy's house. Other evidence also confirmed Charles's story. He had injuries to his face consistent with having been in a scuffle with the man. He also had burns on his wrist from when his coffee spilled on him during the scuffle. Finally, the investigators obtained certain physical evidence at the scene, a bloody palm print on a banister and 2 sources of DNA, including blood left on the banister and light switch, neither of which belonged to Charles. Because of this, the investigators were able to eliminate him as a suspect. Dorothy's perpetrator is described as a black male in his late 20s or early 30s. He is 5 feet 8 inches or 5 feet 9 inches, 150 pounds, with a slender build and a pockmarked complexion. He wore brown dress pants, a brown plaid shirt, and dark, large, plastic-framed glasses with oversized lenses. Due to the extremely violent nature of the crime, the police believe that he may have been high on illegal substances at the time of the slaying. For over a decade, the case remained cold. Then, in the early 2000s, advancements in forensic science provided new hope. The investigators had preserved DNA from the crime scene when it was entered into national databases. In November 2005, the DNA database Gaddis found a match. 41-year-old Gilbert E. Cannon of Delmar, Maryland. The bloody palm print was also matched to him. Cannon was living in Delaware at the time of the crime. He had previous convictions in the state for robbery, theft, escape, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, burglary, and assault. He had also served 7 years in a Maryland prison on illegal substance and robbery charges and for a 1997 slaying. Prior to his release in September 2004, Cannon's DNA was collected, which was used to connect him to this case. The police also discovered that photos of him from around the time of the crime bore a strong resemblance to the composite sketch. After the DNA match, the police were initially unable to find Cannon. That was until January 18, 2006, when he was arrested at his girlfriend's house, where he hid in her basement. He was charged with first-degree slaying, possession of a fatal weapon during a felony, and first-degree burglary. When first questioned, he denied any involvement in the case. However, when confronted with the evidence against him, he confessed. Cannon told the investigators that on that fatal night he was high on substances and was looking for more. He approached Charles at Hardee's and got a ride from him. A fight broke out when Charles would not take him any further than the intersection. He picked up a screwdriver from the truck's floor and chased Charles down. Charles agreed to drive him the rest of the way but then drove off, leaving him behind. Cannon told the investigators that he then started walking down Killen Pond Road. He passed a few houses, but they all had lights on. Looking for a place to sleep, he stopped at the first house that looked empty, which was Dorothy's. When he broke through the back door, he woke her up. Fearing that she would identify him, he attacked and stabbed her with the screwdriver he took from Charles's truck. Cannon confirmed that it was just a coincidence that he chose Dorothy's house. He said that he did not know either her or Charles. He was surprised when he found out that Charles was her son. He also confirmed that he acted alone. On April 24, 2007, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Charles said what happened is like a big nightmare for him. He says it sometimes seems like it did not really happen, like he could drive over to Dorothy's house and she would still be there, but he knows that she will not be there. Her daughter Brenda said that she meant the world to her. She called her every morning and evening. She said Dorothy was her best friend and she misses her dearly. Her other daughter Diana said that if she had lost her life in a car accident or from a medical problem, she could have accepted that. She does not think anyone has the right to take someone's life away like that. Unfortunately, for several years, Charles, Brenda, and Diana did not speak to each other because they did not understand why he had given Cannon a ride. Following Cannon's guilty plea, they began to reconcile. Sadly, on August 2, 2020, Diana passed away at the age of 66. In 1992, a tragedy struck the George Washington National Forest in Virginia when an innocent man was brutally slain. A random crime turned strangers into enemies. But as time went on, the pair became friends. On the evening of June 7, 1992, Sammy Edward Wheeler, a 35-year-old delivery driver, drove his 1988 navy blue Isuzu Trooper to the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. The next morning, hunters stumbled upon his SUV parked near Elkhorn Lake. What they found inside was horrifying. Sammy lay in the back seat, wrapped in a sleeping bag. He had been shot 6 times in the head and chest. Whoever was responsible had tried to erase every trace. Shell casings were gone, fingerprints wiped away. To finish the cover-up, the perpetrator stuffed paper into the gas tank and lit a cigarette in an attempt to burn the vehicle, but the fire never caught. Sammy's wallet was missing, raising early suspicions of robbery. At first, the investigators struggled to find answers. Sammy's personal life was complicated. He lived with his girlfriend, Pat Sneed, who was in the middle of a bitter separation from her ex-husband, Bob Bean. The two men disliked each other, and some wondered if that tension had led to Sammy's demise. His twin brother, Danny Wheeler, also believed there was more to the story and felt the police were not asking the right questions. In the months following Sammy's end, Danny, Pat, and Bob took turns accusing each other of the crime. In this bizarre and convoluted case, the principals agreed on only one thing. It all started when Sammy began dating Pat. In the fall of 1991, Pat moved into a rental unit owned by Danny in Staunton, Virginia. The property had been divided into separate apartments. She and her 2 sons lived in one apartment with Sammy. Danny lived in one of the others. The arrangement suited everyone, except Bob. He felt that the situation was not what was in the best interest for their sons. He had approached her and asked her to stop the living arrangement. She did not agree to it. Bob claimed that he felt forced into going to court so that he could provide some kind of moral environment for his children. In February 1992, a court order was issued that prohibited Sammy from being with Pat in the presence of her sons. To comply, Sammy moved into Danny's apartment. Bob remained suspicious. He hired a private investigator to ensure that the court order was being obeyed. The investigator later testified that Sammy had violated the court order. It is not known if the judge believed the investigator. However, according to Danny, Sammy did not violate the court order. But to be safe and to appease Bob, he stayed away from the apartment and began living in his SUV. For 6 long years, the case went cold. Then, in 1998, desperate for answers, Danny hired private investigator Alan Cates. Cates re-examined the evidence, interviewed locals, and retraced Sammy's final steps. His persistence led to a breakthrough no one expected. A man named Kirk Thomas Bell came forward and admitted that he had been there the night Sammy's life was ended. He told a chilling story. He and his friend Guy Jackson Price, a young Army soldier, had been drinking when they drove into the forest to spotlight hunt. They came across Sammy's parked SUV. Without warning, Price pulled out a rifle and opened fire into the vehicle. Later that night, the two returned to make sure Sammy was not alive anymore. Price used a second gun to fire additional shots before attempting to set the SUV on fire. Bell's confession pointed directly to Price as the shooter. The investigators recovered weapons from Price's parents' home, and ballistic testing linked one to the crime. In May 1999, Price went on trial. He denied being the perpetrator and insisted Bell had pulled the trigger, but the jury did not believe him. Price was convicted of first-degree slaying, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For Sammy's family, the conviction brought long-awaited justice, though it did not erase their pain. Price spent more than 2 decades behind bars, but in March 2020, after multiple denied requests, he was finally granted parole. Even with a conviction, the case left lingering questions. Why did Price choose Sammy's SUV that night? Was it really a random act of violence, or was there more behind it? For Sammy Wheeler's loved ones, the uncertainty remains, but the memory of the man they lost has never faded.